Hello and welcome. You're watching Coronavirus, Facts versus Myths. I'm Gargi Rawat. Let's get to the latest data. In India reported a sudden rise in new COVID cases. 45,951 new infections reported in the last 24 hours, which is higher than Tuesday's 37,566. With 870 new fatalities, the total COVID death count is now inching closer to the 4 lakh mark, though in a welcome development, it's under 1,000 for the third day. 33.28 crore vaccine doses have been administered so far under the nationwide vaccination drive. Now, as restrictions are eased and people are moving out and about, we need to remain alert. Now, the R factor is rising once again. As you can see on the chart there, the R is the number of people that one infected person will pass on a virus to on an average. While it remains low, below 1, however, the fact that it has slowly started rising again is a matter of concern. Now, the big focus on the show, Max Hospital's preprint study that was released recently has found there was a nearly 40% increase in mortality among hospitalized coronavirus patients during the second wave of the pandemic as compared to the previous one. While the mortality was higher across age groups during the second wave, the sharpest threefold increase was seen among young patients below the age of 45. The mortality proportion of admitted patients who died increased from 1.3% last year to 4.1% this year. Well, to talk more about this study, we're now joined by Dr. Sandeep Buddhiraja, Group Medical Director, Max Healthcare. Thank you so much, sir, for sparing your time and joining us. First and foremost, tell us about these findings and also one of the factors that is driving up the numbers is that people arrived at the hospitals at the last minute.
That's right, Gargi. So we basically studied about 20,000 patients who were hospitalized across our 10 hospitals in 5 different North Indian states. Of these, 15,000 were in wave 1, that's last year, and 5,000 plus were in wave 2 this year. And what we found was basically the age and the gender profile of the patients was the same, though the severity of the disease at the time of admission was more in the second wave this year. At the same time, because the severity was more, we saw more patients on admission needed oxygen. There was a higher percentage of patients who required mechanical ventilation. And as a result, there was higher mortality. As you rightfully said, there was a 40% higher mortality in wave 2 as compared to wave 1, 7 versus 11%. And as you again said, that it spread across all age groups, but more so the sharpest rise was in the younger population. We wanted to drill down into the reasons if we could find as to why there was a higher mortality in the younger group. So there are a few facts which emerged, some of which were very evident from our study, and some facts which were known from the reports which were circulating at the time. So one factor was that, because we know during the peak in the second wave, there was clearly a shortage of beds, both in the wards and in ICU. So people were being increasingly managed at home. A lot of people were actually using oxygen at home. So some of them were either getting better or worsening. So people who then worsened on oxygen at home were the ones who were coming to the hospital. So clearly there was a late presentation. And we actually drilled down into the deaths in the younger people last year and this year. And we found on an average, they presented to hospitals later by at least 1 to 1.5 days in the second week. So that clearly was one of the reasons. The other important finding of the study was a higher percentage of patients who were hospitalized developed secondary infections, bacterial and fungal infections, 12% last year versus 28% this year. And any of these infections in these COVID patients makes them sicker and increases the chances of death. So that could be the second reason. Third, of course, as we know, the reports clearly showed that the second wave predominantly was caused by Delta strain, which is the
right. In fact, I was going to ask you about that. Does this now prove that the Delta variant is something that was one of the factors for this more mortality as we see?
So, see, indirectly we can make that correlation because clearly the reports are indicating that this strain is highly infectious. Now, is it more lethal? Now, there are certain studies which do point to that. Now, if we correlate these 2 points together, that NCR especially had a predominantly Delta strain at that time, and we saw a higher mortality. So there seems to be a strong correlation between saying that Delta strain probably was at least in part responsible for causing higher mortality. There may be multiple factors which are contributing. Now, there was another interesting thing which could have led to a lower mortality last year, which was the government policy in the beginning of the pandemic. If you remember, government clearly said that anybody who's RT-PCR positive has to be admitted. That policy later changed to say that only the patients who have moderate and severe illness will get hospitalized and the milder patients can be managed at home. So we may have had a higher proportion of milder people who obviously did not die in the early part of last year. And that may have led to a slightly lower mortality last year as compared to this year. So I think these are
right, but we couldn't have managed those numbers, as it were. We couldn't have managed in hospitals. Doctor, I also wanted to ask: were there any findings about the progress of the disease in terms of how fast it went from being catching the disease to actually being in a very serious condition? There were all these reports of people's oxygen dropping very suddenly after the 5th or 7th day. Anything on that?
Well, this study is basically from the time the patients got hospitalized.
Sure.
And we obviously did take history. So as I said, that there was a late presentation. And, around the 5th to 7th day is the time when the saturation starts to dip down. And we interestingly see that these patients may suddenly deteriorate. So there was a more severe lung involvement. And there was a clear correlation between these patients needing more patients needing oxygen this year than last year at the time of admission. 62% last year versus 74% this year. So that's a significant indication of the significant disease in the lungs by the time these patients presented to us at all age spectrums, whether we are talking about young or old people.
All right, very fascinating, this study, and hopefully we will have more such studies and, to find out more about what exactly went wrong or what was the impact of the Delta variant and during the second wave and why we went through what we did at the time. Thank you so much, Dr. Budhiraja, for joining us on the program. Now, the controversy over India's AstraZeneca vaccine, Covishield, not being accepted by the European Union for vaccination passports there, while the European-made AstraZeneca vaccine, Vaxzevria, is accepted in Europe. The Serum Institute of India has applied to the European medicines agencies to get a nod for the Covishield vaccine and get it approved there. But while this matter is being sorted out, what's created a controversy and some amount of interest is the EU medical body's clarification, which it gave to NDTV as well, which, while it talks about how an application wasn't applied for and various other points, it also says that vaccines are biological products and even tiny differences in manufacturing conditions can result in differences in the final product. Well, to talk more about this, we're joined now by Dr. Chandrakant Laharia, epidemiologist and health system specialist, and Dr. Pavitra Venkat Gopalan, microbiologist and virologist. Thank you so much both for joining us. And Dr. Chandrakant, if you could, tell us, what do you make of this explanation, even though it's AstraZeneca and, the ingredients or the method to make it is the same in Europe and in India, but they're talking about how these, minor biological differences can creep in the manufacturing. Hey, doctor, can you hear me?
So, Gargi, I think, yes, I can hear you. So, Gargi, the one thing is that both the vaccine which are being manufactured in Europe and in India are similar. However, we know that the vaccine has not been included as part of the Green Pass in the European setting. I think beyond being included in the Green Pass, what we need to remember that the concept and the entire idea of a vaccine passport is still being debated at the global level. Therefore, in my opinion, any country or group of countries going for that kind of approach is something which is not very, something which does not reflect global solidarity in these times. Essentially, a vaccine which is being manufactured in India is the same vaccine which is being manufactured in the European setup. On the ground of that, this require additional examination or visits or approval by the European agency. If that is the process, then that I believe the Green Pass should have been delayed or some exemption should have been given that we will await and once this will be approved. But without that kind of clarification, not including, I think, invites the controversy. But I would go beyond the vaccine, as I said earlier, that vaccine passport is a concept which is not agreed. So bringing a vaccine passport in a different form is not something which I would say that it will go that far and should be done right now.
No, absolutely. Then that's a whole different debate, of course, and many don't agree with this concept of a passport. In fact, the African Union has also said that Covishield must be accepted in EU, given that Covishield is something that is being exported to many countries and will be exported to many countries, and it was earlier. But tell us about this, what they're talking about in terms of manufacturing. They're saying that the EU law requires a visit even to the manufacturing sites to ascertain certain facts.
Yeah, I think that's very true, that every country has its own regulatory system, and as part of that regulatory approach, a particular vaccine needs to be submitted to that regulatory body, which will go through the document, and also some of the regulatory body require the physical visit to the manufacturing unit. And I understand that Serum Institute of India has not followed that process due to a variety of reasons, and that kind of physical visit has not been done. So there is a technical ground which is or justification which is true, but the broader fundamental question remains that whether this is the right approach or not. Other thing is that since World Health Organization has already given emergency use licensing to Covishield, and it is being exported to different countries, including African Union and other setups, so it is relatively unfair to put a differential approach to give a green pass to a vaccine which is approved by the global agencies such as World Health Organization.
Absolutely. Dr. Pavitra, if you could also give me, your views on this, and just if you could explain to us this aspect that I was asking Dr. Chandrakant also about, how the EMA has said, the European Medical Agency, that their differences in manufacturing, even minute differences, can bring about some sort of changes, and that's something they're concerned about. They've said that there are biological products, and, tiny differences can affect the final product.
There are multiple factors playing a role here. First, vaccine passports are not new. There are a lot of countries that require various vaccines before you travel. Adding a vaccine against COVID is just, I think, expected norm for the upcoming future. Regarding why Covishield has not been approved and AstraZeneca has been approved, might be coming from a place of, well, maybe we don't trust their system, and I probably am inviting some controversy here by saying this, but Serum Institute is one of the premier institutes that has been manufacturing vaccines safely and effectively for decades now. When you look at the product sheet of the Covishield vaccine as well as the AstraZeneca vaccine, they're pretty much the same. And we know the clinical trials have been done using Covishield. I'm not talking about the AstraZeneca preparation, I'm talking about Covishield. And we have known and identified that it has been safe and effective. Perhaps one of the reasons could simply be that the red tape has not been followed, and it might be a simple process of going through the steps that are needed for the approval. Right. But other than that, there is no need to fear the Covishield vaccine in any way, because it is safe and soundly manufactured in a very trusted system by an experienced manufacturer.
No, absolutely. And this was a very unfortunate controversy. And as Dr. Chandrakant says, he doesn't even agree with the concept of having these sort of, vaccine passports. And now I'd like to focus on Covaxin. And this is some welcome news. The US National Institute of Health has said that India's Covaxin, developed by Bharat Biotech, effectively neutralizes both the alpha and delta variants of coronavirus. And this after results from 2 studies. A blood serum from people who had received Covaxin suggests that the vaccine generates antibodies that effectively neutralize both the alpha and delta variants. Dr. Chandrakant, so some welcome news here, because there's been so much talk of the variants and questions over the vaccine's effectiveness, and there have been various studies as well. So one more study for Covaxin that says it is effective against these variants at least. Right, doctor? Well, I'll ask you, Dr. Pavitra.
Hello.
Right. Right, go ahead,
Hello.
doctor.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, there is some network issue. So yes, we know that most of the vaccines which are currently available, including Covaxin, is effective against alpha variant and delta variant. What we know that all of these emerging variants require relatively higher level of antibody to neutralize the virus. However, we also know that the quantity of antibody produced after the vaccine is not that much dependent upon the protection. So sometimes the level of antibody in individual may have a relatively lower, but as long as it's above the baseline, the individual is protective. So all of the vaccine, including Covaxin, now has been found to be protective against the both alpha variant and delta variant. And it's very likely that these vaccines would be protective against any emerging variant.
All right, and that is a matter that, as we are seeing more and more variants emerge, now we have the Delta Plus variant, Dr. Pavitra. So welcome news here. Also, there is talk that, we may, because of the variants, need a booster shot later. And of course, the studies are taking place on that front also. But welcome news that, the vaccines that were created are effective against the current variants.
It's a beautiful thing. Covaxin uses such a classical technology. People have something against classical, they want new age. But it uses a classical technology where it uses the entire virus. So rather than focusing on specific parts, we are actually well suited to make neutralizing antibody against the entire virus when we use the whole virus itself as it does in Covaxin. So I am very pleasantly surprised, I'm very happy but not surprised that it makes effective neutralizing antibodies. One thing to remember is antibodies are just one arm of our immune system. We also have another type of immune system that we are not able to easily measure in a blood test. Using that also, we are able to establish that immunity has been developed against these variants that last much longer and are in memory. Regarding whether boosters are needed, studies are going on. We will most likely need a booster once a year, just like how we take the flu shot. We all do our annual visit to get our flu vaccine. This might just end up becoming something like that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pavitra and Dr. Chandrakant, for joining us on the program. With that, time for us to slip into a short break. On the other side, we'll answer your questions on vaccines and COVID. Dr. Chandrakant will stay on with us. Now for our special campaign, Vaccinate India, in partnership with Google, where we talk about questions that a lot of you have about the vaccines and about coronavirus. And to answer them, we're joined by Dr. Chandrakant Laheria again. Thank you so much, Doctor, for staying on. And one of the questions that people often Google is about COVID symptoms. And here I want to also put in a question about, between the first wave and second wave, there are some new symptoms also that are being talked about?
Gargi, there is not that much change in the symptoms due to COVID-19, either in the first wave and second wave. However, we have learned that there were a few symptoms which were not being reported earlier, such as loss of smell or loss of taste. However, once they have been recognized, they have been there. So there is not much of the change. But we have learned that there could be diarrhea, there could be typhoid-like symptoms, which can also result due to COVID-19. So our understanding has improved, but there's not much of the changes, except everybody has a cough, cold, respiratory difficulties, breathlessness, but we have loss of sense or smell, we have loss of taste or smell, diarrhea, and some other symptoms could be there, but not much of the change.
So, Doctor, in the second wave, perhaps it's because of the sheer numbers were so huge, but a lot of people talked about, stomach issues, gastric issues. Was this a change from the previous wave or something that was just more talked about the second time around?
I think it's a combination of two things. One, that our understanding of virus has evolved, and now we know that virus can affect different organs of the body. If it affects the intestinal tract, then person would have diarrhea and other kind of symptoms. May affect pancreas, then person might have some of the excessive blood sugar levels and all other aspects. So our understanding has developed and evolved. Second part is that there were large number of cases, and especially only those who were very sick and were hospitalized, and they were investigated in the details. So our understanding is developing from not only from India but other parts of the world. But it's very likely that those symptoms were there earlier also. They have been identified in the process as we understood the disease better.
All right, Doctor. Another question that people look up a lot online is about self-care during COVID.
So in the self-care during the COVID, it depends upon what kind of illness you have. If you are asymptomatic, of course, you don't know unless you have been identified or conducted RT-PCR as part of contact tracing. And in that scenario, you don't have to do anything. Mild individual, of course, need to isolate himself and also take paracetamol or other symptomatic management. If somebody develops a moderate illness, the oxygen saturation is going down, then person needs to be hospitalized. And finally, all of us need to take a good rest, eat healthy diet, and if any symptom develop, you need to go to healthcare facility as early as possible.
Right, doctor, there's a lot of talk about, how the 5th day or the 7th day are very, very crucial and the 10th day is crucial. If you could explain that, what have we found, especially during the second wave, of when does one need to be especially careful and watch out for any changes in symptoms?
So we know that a person is likely to develop symptoms after getting infected within 1 to 14 days. But we also know that starting whenever the symptoms develop, the disease has 2 phases. One is a viral phase. Initial 7 days are viral phases when virus multiplies in the body. And the next 7 days are immune phase. So in this phase, there are different type of reactions. But we also know that usually 4th, 5th to 10th day, person is infectious. And after 10 days of initial illness, person becomes non-infectious. The symptoms in those individuals may develop at various stages depending upon the immune status of that individual. One should not be concerned about that what stage symptoms are developed, but usually once 10 days are gone and person has stayed healthy, it's unlikely that person would develop a very severe disease. But one need to be watchful of the symptoms.
Right, and doctor, even post-COVID, even after you recover, there's a lot of care involved even after that, isn't it?
So we also know that usually most of the people recover after a certain period of time from the illness, but around 1/4 of the total individual are likely to continue to have some symptoms even 4 weeks after illness. And there are 1 in every 10 who can continue to have illness even 12 weeks after the illness. And so this condition is called post-COVID or long COVID. If such kind of symptoms persist, it's important that individual go to a healthcare provider and seek care. And whatever condition is persisting, that needs to be taken care of. What one need to be careful on going for excessive activity or being little careless. You need to pay attention, eat healthy, sleep well, and take rest.
All right. Well, thank you so much, doctor, for joining us and answering all those questions.